Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel. Looking for the truth behind the news. This is episode 34 and I'm in Phuket, Thailand. This is my hotel room. It's very similar to the hotel room in Ukraine, in Odessa. But don't worry, this episode is not about hotel rooms from around the world. This is an episode about Scientology, and we'll be having an interview with Karen de la Carriere and the full interview with Tony Ortega. If you've watched the last two episodes, you'll have seen the first half hour of this interview with Tony, but we'll have the full hour today in today's episode. If you're wondering why I'm wearing these, it's to represent the fact I'm in a hot country, whereas before I was wearing a hat because it was snowing in Ukraine. It's also so that you can't see my red eyes, which have red from crying tears over the fact no one's used the voicemail system, but never mind, I'll get over it. I am slightly disturbed. I found these in my hotel room. I don't know if you can see these at all. Yep, they're eyelashes, removable eyelashes, and I'm slightly concerned as to what they're doing in this room. But never mind. I wanted to just give you a bit of a background, introduce myself. My name's Scott. I've been presenting this program, this show, this podcast, whatever you want to call it, for about, it must be more than 6 months now. And I just wanted to give a tiny little bit of background about what it's about. Basically, I travel around the world. I've been doing that most of my life anyway. But I try to link some of the episodes to the country that I'm in. Or, you know, just talk about generally things from around the world. I don't necessarily have to be there. It just so happens that some of the places I've been in the past have really hit the news anyway. Places like Fukushima, where I lived for 3 years. I was actually in Phuket, Thailand, where I am now, during the tsunami all those years ago. So actually just down the road from where I am at the moment. And this show talks about politics, talks about corruption, cover-ups, mysteries, the paranormal, conspiracies. And basically I've just come through from Ukraine, from Odessa to Kiev, and then I stopped at Israel for 4 days, and then on Egypt 1 day, and then over to here in Phuket, Thailand. Now, I wanted to explain a little bit about how I fund these trips. First of all, they're not actually as expensive as you might think. London to Ukraine, $100. You can check this all out on Skyscanner. The prices do fluctuate according to the days that you travel. I tend to travel on a budget, so I find the cheapest days when possible. So London to Ukraine, $100. Ukraine to Israel, $100. Israel to Thailand with a stopover in Egypt was $500. This was all from Skyscanner. Now I fund this myself, and I tend to spend most of the money I earn on travel. So I do live close to the edge sometimes, literally hand to mouth sometimes, and things can get tense. I fund this by, I work remotely, and I basically make educational materials. I sometimes do online teaching, but basically I consider Truth Sentinel also a job, which I earn nothing from at the moment, but in the future I would like it to make it a little bit profitable so that it pays for the equipment, the time involved in producing the episodes. If you've got any questions, please leave a voicemail, please. Thank you. Anyway, settle back, relax, have a cup of tea, lie down, fall asleep, or start your workout at the gym, whatever you're going to do, and let's listen to episode 34. So, hello to everyone. Thanks for listening. Today's date is the 9th of December, 2014. We've been focusing somewhat on religions lately. It's not always going to be like that. We'll look at politics, mysteries, cover-ups, everything Just so happens things have fallen into place regarding religions and cults and things like that at the moment, regarding guests. Today's episode is about Scientology, so we're sticking with a similar theme. And I think there will be some episodes connected to religion up until the end of this year, particularly with Christmas coming up, etc. So this episode is going to be almost entirely focused on Scientology, with the full interview with Tony Ortega. As I mentioned in my prelude to this episode, if you've listened to the last two episodes, you can skip the first half hour if you like, because it's only the last half hour that is new today. Tony gives an excellent background into Scientology, obviously from a slightly biased critical standpoint, but we've had no responses from Scientologists to come on and talk. The offer is still open for a frank chat. If any Scientologists are listening would like to come on in the new year, please get in contact. scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Still hoping Tom Cruise or John Travolta will come on. You just, you never know. Tom, if you're listening, get in touch. I actually do quite like both of those as actors. They've been in some good movies, particularly like Minority Report, Born on the 4th of July, which of course one of our guests was in, Sean Stone, and Pulp Fiction, that was good, with John Travolta. After our chat with Tony, there will be a full interview with Karen de la Carriere, dubbed the Queen of Scientology, as she was married to Heber Jentzsch, the former director of Scientology worldwide. So this is episode 34, and there'll be a quiz at the end of today's episode for regular listeners. Just as a bit of fun, and because I used to be an English teacher, sometimes still am. And quizzes are a great way to see who's been listening. You can leave answers in the chat room on the Truth Sentinel website. I'll put up a graphic with the website address later, so you can go and check that out. I'm going to try and update that with the latest episodes. I also wanted to let you know how you can download episodes very easily if you want to use them to listen in your iPod or on your telephone when you go for a walk, because I find that's the best way to listen to podcasts at the gym, or you could be doing some work where you don't need to think too much, and play a podcast then. So just to let you know how to download and to give you a brief overview of our website, very quick one, have a look at this video. So here's the Truth Sentinel YouTube channel. We've got Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 2 YouTube channels. This is Truth Sentinel. This is our Facebook page, and this is the Truth Sentinel website. You can see if you log into this website, it shows where you are on the world map, just for a bit of fun. You can record your messages here for the voicemails. There's latest episodes, need to update that. There's a chat room. You can just log in as a guest. You don't have to join any software or join any sites or anything. Just log in as a guest. And at the bottom, lots of contact details, details about t-shirts, tweets from Twitter. But I wanted to show you how to download a Truth Sentinel episode as a podcast. Just delete everything before YouTube. So www. delete that. Just be left with YouTube, as you'll see in this video. Then type SS. So it should say ssyoutube.com, nothing else apart from everything after it. Hit return, and you will come to a download page, and it will give you options to download. I usually just click on MP4 360p. Click on that, and it will download the episode for you and go to your downloads folder on your computer. It's as simple as that. You just wait for it to download, and then it's done. You've got a file with the episode. So get in contact if you think you can help Truth Sentinel in any way. I was contacted by a listener who's an excellent musician, and you'll see his piece has been added as the new intro music to Truth Sentinel. And we're very grateful to Mateus Jaguar for that, and also his girlfriend Victoria Ferrari. They can be contacted at 007@startmail.com. I'm going to leave some links on the video anyway, so click on the links for more information. Matthias Jaguar is the founder of the New Awareness Movement, and he's also going to be coming on as a guest in the new year to talk about maybe geoengineering, GMO foods, energy. Who knows what he's going to be talking about. We'll find out later. By the way, if my throat sounds a bit deeper today, I've been suffering a bit from a cold, but seems to be getting better, but not quite over it yet. So just a brief roundup of things that caught my eye in the news. Of course, over in Thailand, we've got the Thai King's birthday celebrations going on. Thai King, I think, is 87, one of the oldest monarchs, if not the oldest monarch in the world. He didn't make an appearance as he's also sick, apparently at the moment. I'm not a big fan of royalty, but in comparison to the British monarchy, this guy's at least respected more. Whether that's because of a better marketing campaign is another matter, but in my view, there's no place for like elevating any human into a position that's kind of like a deity, whether it be a king, queen, pope or president. Talking of princes, the husband of a nurse who killed herself over taking a prank call to the medical staff treating the Duchess of Cambridge, says he was consoled by a letter from Prince William. That whole situation is very dubious, but that's another matter. Anyway, apparently this guy can't forgive the hoaxers who did that. The prince wrote to Jacinta Saldana's family to convey his sympathy for them after her unbelievably sad death. Now listen, I haven't got anything particularly against Prince William as such. I don't like to hold ill feeling towards people. I just think the whole idea of the royal family is just so outdated now, and it is very hypocritical of Prince William to be touring the world at the moment talking about protection of animals, as his father's done, as his brother's done, when they've gone on hunting trips killing endangered species. Prince Philip has killed endangered species, so it doesn't make any sense. And then when you have Prince William coming out with comments like you know, condemning trinkets and jewelry, I mean, that's just laughable. Who's got the most trinkets and jewelry of anyone else in the world? Probably the Queen. And then, you know, previously he was talking about ivory. They've got the largest collection of ivory in the world. It's just crazy. Whoever thought up the idea of setting up Prince William as an ambassador for you know, endangered species, and also about fighting the, you know, illegal ivory trade? It's just ridiculous. That's the problem I've got with it. I've also got a problem with wasting money on royalty. We don't need to do it in this day and age. They should work like everyone else. Anyway, that's enough about that. Okay, so Prince William has met Obama whilst campaigning for the protection of animals, and you know, someone commented on the fact that, you know, many politicians would have given their right arm for 20 minutes with Obama to tell them about their important needs and campaigns. And it's true, really. Why really should he be given 20 minutes with Obama? You know, he basically in a scam kind of campaign as well that doesn't make any sense. It's very curious. I'd love to know what they really did talk about behind closed doors. Okay, anyway, elsewhere in Asia, Typhoon Hagupit is sweeping across the eastern Philippines, toppling trees and power lines, and I believe, you know, a fair number of people have been killed, or at least 25 the last time I heard. So as mentioned, we're going to start to look at Scientology in more detail today, and talking to Carriere. First, we're going to have the full interview with Tony Ortega, a journalist and investigator who's been looking at Scientology for quite a number of years, I think since 1995. And he used to be editor-in-chief of the Village Voice from 2007 to 2012. We were very fortunate to speak to Tony, and he's given us an excellent background to Scientology before we have our chat afterwards with Carriere. So let's listen to the full interview. The first two parts were on the last two episodes, but this is the full interview. So if you've heard the first two parts, you might want to skip the next 30 minutes, or you might want to listen to it again, just as a recap. Anyway, here's the interview. So I'm very pleased to welcome journalist Tony Ortega to speak with us today. Hi Tony, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. As I mentioned to you, I'm going to be interviewing Karen, hopefully this week, and I wanted to speak to you first to get a bit of a background on Scientology for me and for the listeners for when we speak to Karen. My only knowledge of Scientology comes from a little bit of research, and I did read Dianetics when I was younger, and I remember it seemed very sort of intelligently written, but that did seem to go around in circles, and I never quite understood what it was trying to say. Almost like intelligent madness, that's what I felt about it. What's your opinion, first of all, on the science behind Scientology? Is there any validity to any of it?
Well, I'll defer to the scientists that have looked into it and found that there's no science at all. Dianetics is actually a fascinating book. Former church member Vance Woodward and I blogged it from cover to cover, and it's always fascinating to me when I hear people say they read it and they thought it was interesting, because I always wonder, did you really read it? If you get down deep into it, it's just a very strange work. I mean, Ron Hubbard was a World War II vet who claimed to have been very injured and had found this process of the mind to heal himself, and so that was the sort of background on this book, that he had discovered the true nature of the human mind and how to heal various illnesses. He claimed that something like 70% of all illnesses are actually just psychosomatic, and so with his counseling, he could heal it. But if you read that book, he not only claims that it's the greatest discovery since man discovered fire. That's literally the first sentence in the book. But that he was the first person to discover how the human mind actually works, and then he counsels people to go back in time to remember what was happening to them in the womb. And the reason that's important is that his theory was virtually every pregnancy is threatened by women making multiple abortion attempts on themselves, and men and women having rough sex and endangering the fetus. And you read this and you think, what is he talking about? I mean, it's his own family members said that basically he was talking about his own life and his own sort of hang-ups. But it's this very bizarre book that claims that pregnancy is this horrible ordeal, and that every woman attempts to kill her fetus 20 or 30 times, and you spend the rest of your life not reaching your full potential because those memories are still hanging around in something called your reactive mind. It's completely ludicrous. There's absolutely no science to back it up. And it did create a fad. There was a real craze when the book first came out. In the first year, people were creating these Dianetics clubs and were trying to help each other remember what they went through in the womb. Well, I mean, come on. The movie The Master does a great job of actually illustrating that, showing these adults pretending like they're in the womb and remembering mom and dad having rough sex. That's what's so interesting to me. One of the things interesting to me about the Church of Scientology is it does it the best it can not to discuss openly these ideas, because I think if people understood what's actually in Dianetics, they would be kind of shocked.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it. I don't think I got to the end of it. This was quite some time ago. I just it sounded like it was written by someone intelligent, but I didn't get it, and it did just seem to go around in circles, and I think I got bored. It's quite a big book, Yeah,
well, Hubbard was a professional writer. He was very good at getting people, interested in what he was writing. He had been a pulp writer. He had written a lot of westerns and fantasy and science fiction. I know most people call him a science fiction writer, but that was only one element of what he did. And he was a pro. I mean, he punched out stories every day and for many, many years. And he was good at getting attention. And if you approach Dianetics in that way and look at it as kind of a carnival barker trying to get your attention, he's a master at it. I mean, he keeps dropping hints that he's going to give you the way to unleash this potential you've never had. And to this day, that's really what the come on is with Scientology. I know some people wrestled with, why is this appeal to people? Why do people join? But it's actually very simple, and that is Scientology tells you that you are an immortal being that's lived countless times in the past, and you're being held back because there's this thing called the reactive mind, which prevents you from seeing your true nature. And only Scientology, through its counseling, can erase that reactive mind so that you can then see your immortal self going back millions and billions of years. And once you have that ability, you have many other abilities that make you impervious to illness, allow you the ability to affect matter just with your mind. It essentially promises being a superhuman. And that's been the promise since day one in May 1950 when he first came out with that book, and it still is today. Again, they don't like to advertise that, and when they ask the celebrities always just say something like, "Oh, it helped me in my life, and you should just read the book and find out yourself." But if they were honest and talked about what it's really about, it's about convincing you that you're this immortal, ultimately powerful being that someday will rule entire universes. I mean, that's what Hubbard was promising.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that might be attractive to some people, being an immortal being and
running
their own universe.
It's only ever attracted a very small slice of the public. There's always people that are interested in that for whatever reason, but it's never been a widely attractive idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's if you just look at superheroes and the whole the amount of people that follow all the different superheroes, then it's a fairly popular idea.
It is, and I don't blame people that they want to improve themselves. I mean, who doesn't? And that's, in some countries, Scientology is a self-help group, but in other countries, they say they're a church and a religion, and that gives them a certain amount of cover that they don't have to talk about themselves or how they spend their money, and they use that religious cloaking in a very effective way. But say, in Israel, for example, they can't say that they're a church, and so they say, we're just going to help you improve yourself. And I remember Janet Reitman, who had a terrific book about Scientology 3 years ago. We were talking about, I think I was at a talk she gave, and she was saying that at some point in the 80s or the 90s, the Scientology, they've always had this terrible reputation, and they've always had problems with the press, and most of the public repels at the name Scientology, and so they actually hired some consultants to give them some advice. What can we do to grow in popularity? And those consultants said, drop the religion stuff. You're not a religion. You are a self-help group, and self-help groups are very popular. And if you would just say that, and Janet Reitman, in her talk said that they were given that advice and they rejected it.
But being accepted as a religion does give you some benefits, doesn't it? Like tax breaks and some protection in the law and things like that.
Absolutely, no question. I mean, that's what, how they first, it's interesting because when Hubbard came out with it in 1950, the full title of Dianetics is Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. And to this day, if you talk to long-time Scientologists that got into it in the 70s, they'll tell you that they didn't get into a religion. They were told this was an applied philosophy, and it was scientific. And this ability to go back in time and relive your past lives millions of years ago, they said it's an exact science. They even had a little machine called the E-meter that they claim helps them pinpoint those memories and sift out what they went through. And to them, this is science. This is absolute science. There's no faith to it. I remember one longtime Scientologist trying to help me understand the upper levels and why he was attracted to Scientology. He said, Tony, I'm a skeptic, and what I like about Scientology is they don't ask you to believe anything. There's no belief at all. It's a science, see? So from the beginning, L. Ron Hubbard was promoting this idea of science, but he ran into trouble because right from Dianetics in 1950, he was making these health claims that I mentioned before. Well, in the 50s, the U.S. government was more vigilant about that kind of thing, and by the mid-50s, the FDA was getting unhappy because they could see that this group, these Scientologists, were making claims about being able to heal just about anything. So in 1963, immediately within the first couple of years, Hubbard was running into problems with the FDA. And in 1953 is when he sent a letter to one of his closest followers, and he literally used the words, "Let's try the religion angle." I mean, he actually said it that way. So from the beginning, it was pretty clear that Hubbard saw in calling Scientology religion a way to deal with government interference. And I've talked to people that were around in the mid-'60s, and around 67, 68, overnight, they started calling themselves ministers and wearing clerical collars because that's when they lost their tax-exempt status, and Hubbard wanted to get it back. They were not tax-exempt from 1967 to 1991. They fought that whole time with the IRS. The IRS finally caved in 1991 and started a study that resulted in a settlement in 1993. And they've been tax exempt since then, and it saved them $1 billion tax bill. So you're right. Calling yourself a church calling themselves a church has given them this tax exempt status, which has saved them billions, and it also allows them to go into court and say, people are always suing them for things like fraud, and they just turn around and say, yeah, but we're a church, you can't inquire into our internal activities, and the courts struggle with that. I mean, I'm following a couple of court cases right now where that's always Scientology's first defense. We're a church, leave us alone, and it makes these lawsuits difficult, even when it's there's a case in Florida right now where a couple are suing over having given hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations, and they claim they have evidence that it was very fraudulent. So they were building a new building, for example, they wanted to put a big cross up on the top, the Scientology cross, which is very different than a Christian cross. And so they asked this couple to donate, I don't know how much, tens of thousands of dollars to pay for this big cross, and then they found, so that they would sort of be the donors for the cross, and then they found out later that they were hitting up other people for the same thing. So, you can say, well, this is donations because you believe in this church, but these folks are saying, hang on, wait a minute, there's also, questions of how you do it. But that religious cloaking, again, makes it very complicated in court.
Is that a cross? Is that a symbol of Scientology then?
Well, Scientology came up with this cross. It's like a Christian cross, and then there are 4 more points that come out at angles. And it's been pointed out that what it resembles is the Rosicrucian cross, and which is the cross that Aleister Crowley used, and that's a whole other interesting side of Scientology. After World War II, before Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard went to Los Angeles and moved into the Pasadena home of a Caltech rocket scientist named Jack Parsons, very kind of a famous guy in his own right. Jack was an occultist, and he had a large house that he rented out rooms, but the rule was only eccentrics could live there. And in 1945, there were people, there were kind of bohemian artists, that kind of thing. And what Jack was into was the occult, and in particular, he was the local sort of representative for Aleister Crowley's Thelema group. And it's a kind of they believe in what they call magic with a M-A-G-I-C-K. And Aleister Crowley believed that they could bring forth these special entities on Earth, and Jack got Hubbard into it, and so they kept records, and we know that this went on. So Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were doing these bizarre occult sex rituals in 1946, and Lawrence Wright spelled those out pretty clearly in his book Going Clear. And so that was in 46. Dianetics came out in 1950s. Scientology was codified in 1952, and various scholars have shown, academic scholars, that you can see that influence of Crowley and the occult directly on Scientology. The way it uses levels, the way levels always start at 0, and the way that they use the Crowley cross. So, it resembles a Christian cross, and they call it a church, but really early Scientology has more in common with the occult.
And do Scientologists deny that link to Aleister Crowley?
Yeah, they do. Scientology has this really hilarious explanation for why L. Ron Hubbard was performing bizarre occult sex rituals in a house in Pasadena. Their claim, in World War II, he had done training in intelligence. He was a lieutenant in the Navy, and so their claim is that the Navy or the FBI sent Hubbard into that occult house in order to break up black magic on the West Coast. I mean, they literally, use words like that, and it's ludicrous. There's no record of that at all. I mean, it's Hubbard was into it. He had been interested in the occult for a long time, and again, you can see a lot of that influence on Scientology itself. There's an Ohio State University professor named Hugh Urban who did a terrific study showing the parallels between Crowley's occult and Hubbard's Scientology. And if you just search on my name, Tony Ortega, Scientology occult, you'll easily find that it's from when I was at the Village Voice, and I put side by side the Crowley occult cross and the Scientology cross, and you'll see they're, you know, an exact match.
Okay, so L. Ron Hubbard founded it. I understand David Miscavige is now the leader. Do you think he genuinely believes that Scientology is a good force for people, or does he have other motivations?
I think I believe, I've been told by people who work very closely with him that he speaks in a way that would suggest he genuinely believes in L. Ron Hubbard and the technology. So, you know, for example, when you're going through these processes to remember what happened to you millions of years ago, you bump into things like what they call implants, and there's also these foreign entities that are part of you. And as you're dealing with those, you go through some what they call blowing charge, which I guess would be like we're going into our past and finding these electronic nodes and dissipating them, and it causes a physical reaction. And he believed so much in blowing off charge that he actually had special copper wires and these sort of tubes installed at the international base so you could grab hold of them and blow charge off and then, you know, go off into the ground or something. I mean, really bizarre things that you wouldn't bother to do if you didn't at least, you know, believe that there was some truth to it. And yeah, he talks as if, you know, he really believes that Scientology does what Hubbard said it would. But he also, you know, there's another side to Scientology besides the past lives and, you know, getting rid of your active mind, and that is Hubbard wrote millions of words about control and interrogation, and that part David Miscavige thoroughly adheres to, and in some ways he's made things very Orwellian inside Scientology, and he's driving people away. I mean, that's the real story of Scientology today, is that it's shrinking and it's going through some really terrible crises right now, and David Miscavige is so kind of hardcore and by the book. He's unable to deal with the fact that he's, you know, longtime Scientologists are becoming very disillusioned and walking away. Even some that still adhere to Hubbard, and that's what we've seen the last few years. Is so interesting. Is you see people coming out of Scientology that still like Hubbard and still like these ideas, but they just can't take Miscavige anymore. So he's got a real issue on his hands, and I just don't see him moderating things at all.
And he did know L. Ron Hubbard, didn't he? And he grew up in Scientology.
He was a young kid in South Philly who had some asthma, and his dad first discovered Dianetic Scientology and thought that there might be a solution for his son, got his son into it. They ended up moving to England, and David was still just a young guy, and he became an auditor at, I don't know, I think something like only 12 years old or something like that. And Lawrence Wright wrote a story that one of the things he apparently, you know, he took some steroidal medicine for his asthma, and it made him kind of a little bit, you know, kind of on edge and aggressive. And the famous story was told at St. Hill in England was that he ended up punching his own subject. In Scientology and counseling, you have an auditor and a pre-clear, it's called. The subject is the pre-clear. And so David became famous because he slugged his pre-clear. Then he ended up going to America, back to the United States, and to California, where Hubbard was living, I think in either 77 or 78. Hubbard was living in near the Palm Springs area, and he had a kind of a large spread. And at that point, Hubbard had decided to get into making films. I think he was inspired by Star Wars. He realized that, you know, after all, you know, he had spent the 30s and 40s writing space opera, and now suddenly space opera was actually popular with the public. So he decided he wanted to make this major epic film, but first needed to learn the techniques, and so he got a crew together of his followers, and they started making these little training films. And I'm told they're just absolutely unwatchable. But there's great photographs of these folks making these films, and you can see Hubbard up there with, you know, telling people what to do, and there's this really little guy handling one of the cameras, and that was David Miscavige. So I believe there was a 4-person camera unit, 2 people on film cameras, 2 people on video cameras, and Miscavige's job was to run one of those. So he was definitely in the presence of the old man himself. But then what happened was in '77 there was an FBI raid, and Hubbard had to go into hiding for a while, and he no longer trusted a lot of the people that had been running his intelligence unit stuff, and so he started to turn things over to the younger generation, and that's how David Miscavige started his rise to the top. Hubbard died in '86, and by then Miscavige had already consolidated a lot of his power, and ever since then Miscavige has been totally in control.
And you mentioned the auditors. Do they get paid for doing that?
Do auditors get paid? That's a good question. Well, yeah, it depends on the situation. The way Scientology, and Miscavige is changing this in a way that's making it tough on people in the church. The way it used to work is you used to have people in the field, and they would try to bring in people to start people in Scientology, and people actually built businesses in their own homes where I'll bring somebody in, I'll audit them through the first or train them through the first level of classes, and then move them on to the central org, it's called, short for organization. And those people made a very good living. They would make they didn't charge a lot for those low-level courses, but on a $300 course, they'd get 10% of it. And if you get enough pre-clears coming through, some of these people did really well. And then you're supposed to send them on to the org for the middle part of what's called their bridge to total freedom. And then once they get through that middle portion, start to get to the upper levels, then they have to go to what's called advanced orgs, and there were only a few advanced orgs in the world. Now, at the orgs and the advanced orgs, the staff was paid very little. So the real money was in the people that were in the field. And in recent years, Miscavige has decimated those field auditors. And I've talked to a number of them that, he's started replacing the orgs with what he calls ideal orgs, and he wants people to do as much as possible in those buildings. And so he has pushed away these people that were working in the field. So now it's just the staff, and the staff are paid very little. Staff who work in the orgs don't make a lot of money. They don't get paid as little as the Sea Org, but most of them have second jobs because it's really low pay. And then there's the Sea Org. These are the people who dedicated their whole lives to Scientology, who work 112 hours a week, and they sign billion-year contracts. There's 3,000 or 4,000 of them in the world, and they really do the inner workings of the church, and they get paid 30 or 40 cents an hour.
You were joking about billion-year contracts, right? I mean, when you're talking about past lives and going back millions of years, just checking.
No, I'm not kidding. I've had copies of them. They believe that you've lived countless times in the past, and you'll live countless times in the future, and this current body you're walking around in is just something very temporary. And so when you sign on for the Sea Org, you promise, I will serve for 1 billion years. And you sign that document. And, the church in the past has said, oh, it's just symbolic, But no, I mean, you talk to anybody that's been in the Sea Org, and they really believed it. Yeah, I'm signing on for the duration, And they, like I said, they get paid, 30, 40, 50 bucks a week, and they're working 112 hours. Sleep deprivation is definitely part of the control processes. And so there's no real career that makes much sense inside Scientology. But those field people and people who recruit for them, they're called FSMs, field staff members, and they can make pretty good money, or they could in the past. Like I said, in recent years, Miscavige seems to have been cracking down and excommunicating some of those folks. I think it's because he wants more people to be in the buildings, and it's not really working.
Okay, now I read that Scientologists don't particularly like being called a cult. Now, would you say they are a cult? Is Scientology a cult, in your opinion?
Yeah, I try not to get into that argument because, is it a religion or is it a cult? Because there's just no real good definition of the word cult. It means one thing to some people and something else to other people. They are, I call them the Church of Scientology because they call themselves the Church of Scientology. They have tax-exempt status, and if they are a church, Why are they forcing young women to have abortions? Why are they splitting up families? Why are they paying 10-year-old children, 30 or 40 cents an hour? I'd rather discuss what their behavior is, and the fact that they imprison people on something called the RPF for years at a time. I'd rather talk about their behaviors than argue, the definition of a word. I mean, they're a destructive group. There's no question about it, and it's been exposed time and time again since the 50s that they treat people so poorly and get away with it because they call themselves a church. But you can go through. I mean, I know Rick Ross real well, who's a cult expert, and he's very careful about why he calls something a cult. We can go through that, but I just feel like you end up getting in a big argument about, well, don't all churches do this or all churches do that, and it seems like it's a big waste of time to me. I'm more interested in the specific things that Scientology does, and not getting caught up in arguments like that.
Okay, no, fair enough. You mentioned about some people getting paid 40 cents an hour. Isn't that illegal in the States?
Well, that's where that religious cloaking comes in, because churches can pay people what they want, because they claim it's religious work. Now, if you actually talk to people who are in a Sea Org, they'll tell you they were cleaning toilets out with toothbrushes and clearing land and printing books, and there's anything but religious. So when you ask Scientology about Sea Org, they compare it to a monastery. They say it's like monks, but if you actually talk to Sea Org members, they'll say there's nothing spiritual going on. It's just manual labor for 30 cents, 40 cents an hour. But they can get away with it because whenever anybody's challenged it in the court, there was one not too long ago, they just say, hey, we're a religion, we don't have to follow those rules. So a couple, Mark and Claire Headley, left Scientology in 2005. They literally had to escape the secretive international base east of Los Angeles, and they sued under those. And that was, a lot of people sued for different reasons, but their particular suit was about that, the labor law, the how can you have us trapped on a base working for pennies an hour in the United States. And they just ran into that problem that it's so difficult to sue something that calls itself a church under labor laws, and they lost.
Would you say Scientology is harmless, or would you say is a dangerous cult, religion, whatever anyone wants to call it? Is it something that people shouldn't consider getting involved with? I mean, don't people have the right to believe in what they want, or do you think people should be warned against joining Scientology?
That's a really great question, because a lot of organizations have odd beliefs, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if all Scientology was a group that believed that they had lived millions of years in the past and could remember their life on other planets, go have fun. That's great. The problem is they lie to the public about what they're about. They will not admit that that's what it's about. They won't tell you what you're really getting into until you're hundreds of thousands of dollars into the thing. And then they're very harmful to families. They rip families apart. If you aren't completely dedicated to Scientology and you criticize it, the rest of your family has to cut off all ties with you. For 25 years, they were forcing young women in the Sea Org to have abortions rather than have children and make them less able to work for the church. When somebody leaves Scientology, and if they dare criticize it, they can be hounded and their lives ruined. Scientology has an entire division whose job it is to retaliate against people for speaking out. So, Scientology for decades has proven to be a very harmful group. And one of the reasons why I keep an eye on it, and other people do, is that one of the number one rules of Scientology is you have to follow source. Source is L. Ron Hubbard. They have to follow his instructions. Well, he died in 1986, and they can't change anything. And so they're still following rules about destroying people that he wrote in the mid-'60s, and they're following it to the letter. So this is why it's a really it's an organization that concerns a lot of people, because it's on autopilot, and it just goes around and rips families apart and does what it can to ruin people. And the government doesn't do anything because the Scientology calls itself a church. It's a very bizarre set of circumstances, and I think it's part of the reason why anytime anybody writes anything about Scientology, it attracts a lot of readers because people are curious. It's this odd mixture of space age beliefs, celebrity members, and just ruthless bullying of people. It's just the strangest combination of factors,
And who do they actually worship, and what are Thetans?
They worship themselves. I mean, this is what Scientology. One of the things that's most important to understand about Scientology is there's no deity, there's no God. You are trained to believe that you are possibly a god, and that if you can get through the top level of this incredibly expensive training, you will get control of your own universe. And they revere L. Ron Hubbard for giving them the secret, but he's not really their deity. Hubbard, is incredibly admired by all of them, and they think that he is the only person who discovered these things. But what propels a person up this Scientology bridge, which gets more and more and more expensive, is this idea that ultimately you're going to be able to rule the universe. Nancy Cartwright, who was the voice of Bart Simpson, she was actually, they're always so cautious about what they say to the American press, but once in a while, Scientologists will tell foreign press more interesting things. She gave an interview to an Australian TV journalist, and she admitted that, this was how you become a god. I mean, that's why they're in Scientology. So, it's a great question. Who do they worship? They worship themselves. It's an incredibly narcissistic pursuit, which is why I think it has had some success with celebrities. Now, not very many. It's always exaggerated. But the few celebrities that they've attracted, you can't blame them, because Scientology is all about you. From the first day you're in there, they're asking you questions about you, and it's all about self-discovery. And, it's this flattering idea that there's this incredible being, this undiscovered being inside of you, and Scientology will help you bring it out.
And from the start, don't they sort of sit down with you and ask you a lot of questions about your life and focus on you? And I can see how that would be quite appealing for, it's always good to have a chat with people about your life and try and work out where it all went wrong.
Absolutely, and I'm not going to deny that there's not some benefit to that. I mean, especially the lower levels where people are, there are people who have difficulties in life because they feel defeated, they're shy, they don't know how to get out of life what they want, and they don't know how to talk about it. And so here's this, organization that sits one person down with you and asks you, tell me about your life, tell me what you've gone through, tell me what you want. That's going to make a lot of people feel better, but feeling better because you've got somebody actually interested in what you have to say, that's not a great secret. I mean, they then make the leap that L. Ron Hubbard somehow discovered some truths that nobody had ever known before. It's ludicrous. I mean, it's just, when you pay attention to somebody and ask them about their lives, you're going to make them feel better. But then they ask them, okay, all this crazy stuff about, well, what's really going on is you have these different parts of your brain, and we're helping you, you have these traumatic memories stored in your protoplasm. I mean, all just sort of nonsense. But sure, people are going to feel better when they're asked about themselves. But and you mentioned it at the low level, even at the high level, it's all about you. I mean, you get to the top levels of Scientology, and you're still being asked questions about yourself all the way through it. And that's another thing that makes Scientology so different than other organizations.
And have you ever actually been audited yourself? Have you gone through that process at all?
I've read logs and logs and logs of what it's like, and I don't need to go. It's so boring. You cannot imagine how tedious it is to be asked the same questions over and over and over again. Karen de la Carriere, who you've talked to, has offered to put me through that, but the reason why I personally object to it is that what Scientology asks you to do in a setting that's ostensibly just sort of to help you is they're asking you to confess to things right from the beginning. And I don't feel comfortable talking to Scientologists about, my own life and things I don't talk to other people about. I think it's a sucker's game. But like I said, I'm fully familiar with it, and I've read logs of it. I actually have, what's fun, I actually have transcripts of very early Dianetics sessions going back to the 50s, so you can see how it kind of progressed over time.
And you mentioned celebrities. Do they get treated exactly the same, or would you say they get treated a bit differently?
You know, people assume that they have a completely different experience. I think you'll talk to, Karen may even say that, but I personally, I think what's most interesting to me is that the Scientologists largely do go through the same courses and do the same kind of training. So, for example, yes, they're pampered. They have a different facility. They're catered to, but one of the things you do as a low-level Scientologist is you talk to ashtrays. It's one of these exercises that Hubbard came up with where you give an ashtray instructions: stand up ashtray, sit down ashtray, and they'll do it with force. Stand up ashtray, thank you. Effectiveness, and none of it is true. You don't get drug counseling; you get Scientology training. There are no medical personnel around. The staff is actually made up of former addicts, and the effectiveness rate is just pulled out of the air. There's no truth to it. And as far as a safe environment, the lawsuits that they're facing right now all make the accusation that the facilities are rife with drug use, sex for drugs trading going on, and they've had patient deaths recently. There were 3 deaths within 9 months at their flagship facility in Oklahoma. That's sparked government investigations, numerous lawsuits. The one in Georgia had to shut down because of a patient death and the ensuing investigations and lawsuits there. There's a particular attorney in Las Vegas named Ryan Hamilton who's now filed 24 lawsuits around the country against Narconon because it's just so basically deceptive. And again, I think if Scientology would just tell the truth, it would have so fewer problems. If they just said, look, we think we can help you with your drug problem. Come here, we use Scientology training, and we think L. Ron Hubbard came up with a way to help you get off drugs. If they just did that, no problem. But instead they lie. They do everything they can to hide the fact that Narconon is even attached to Scientology, and that's what gets them in trouble. So Narconon's in big trouble. David Miscavige recently made some announcements regarding Narconon that tell me that he, and Mike Rinder had predicted this. Mike is the former Scientology spokesman, and he keeps a close watch on what Miscavige is doing. And Mike had predicted that if Narconon became enough of a problem, that Miscavige would just walk away from it. And he's showing some signs of that. He's announced some new Narconons in other countries because I think he realizes they're in big trouble in the United States.
And there does seem to be lots of lawsuits going on regarding other stuff as well. I mean, is it becoming quite an expensive business for Scientology? Are they going to have to spend out a lot of money, or do they tend to win these court cases?
They always have had a large budget for legal matters, and they have proved themselves willing to spend any amount to fight lawsuits. And, it's financed on the back of these parishioners. I mean, there's fewer and fewer Scientologists in the world, but they're pressured more and more to donate money. And what is that money spent on? There's a lawsuit going on in Texas right now, a woman who's married to Marty Rathbun, and her name is Monique Rathbun. Monique was never in the church. Her husband was the former number 2 executive, and when he left Scientology and then began criticizing it, Scientology sent this group of members down to Texas to harass them and just surveil them and follow them. So she's suing, saying, look, I was never in the Church of Scientology. Why are you following me around? Why are you, harassing me? And it's, relatively low-level lawsuit in a small county in Texas, but I went to some of those initial hearings, and there's like 20 lawyers in Church of Scientology in suits, and they're willing to spend anything to fight every lawsuit there is, but they literally have billions of dollars. I think Lawrence Wright, in his book Growing Clear, estimated that as tiny as Scientology is, it has more liquid cash in the United States than the Catholic Church. And it's just because they've spent decades pressuring their members to give huge donations, and their costs are so low because they pay 40 cents an hour to their workers, and they don't pay taxes. So a woman named Debbie Cook came out of the church not too long ago. She was a former longtime executive, and she estimated that just in liquid assets in the IAS, which is the the membership organization where members are pressured to donate huge amounts. Just the IAS, David Miscavige is sitting on a fund of over $1 billion in liquid cash. So he can afford to pay these attorneys, and he does. They spend amazing amounts of money defending all these lawsuits, and they do get some victories. In the United States, our legal system is susceptible to. Sorry about the sirens here in New York City. That's just kind of a thing we
that's
have.
good. That's adds some authenticity.
The American court system is susceptible to bad actors who have a lot of money and can just file motion after motion and wear people down. So, rarely do these things ever get to trial, and when they do, Scientology usually has a hard time because the facts are so bad for them. But they're very good at delaying and just costing plaintiffs, and they give up after a while, So, and they find some technicality to get things thrown out on. It's really amazing watching these cases. They take so long, and Scientology comes up with all these creative offenses that most people would not have the money to even attempt. That's what I'm saying,
Indeed. We'll probably wind it down soon. So I just have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a lot of people are leaving. You mentioned people leaving. There seems to be a lot. Is there more than, since you've been following this for 20 years or more, is there more than usual leaving? I mean, Karen de la Carriere is the lady I'll be speaking to later on this week. Right. She was in Scientology for about 35 years and married to its president. How high up was Karen in the whole scheme of things in Scientology?
Karen's a good example. I mean, she's somebody that knew everybody, and she worked directly with Hubbard. And yeah, she married Heber Jentzsch, who was president of the Church of Scientology, which was largely a spokesman's role. It wasn't, Miscavige has always, since '86, ruled the place. But Heber was a very popular, very important person. He had a relationship. He actually had a relationship with reporters, which today they don't have anybody that has a relationship with reporters. And she was a well-known person that was basically about as high up as a Scientologist could go. And like many other longtime people, she left primarily because of what David Miscavige was doing. And that's, in an organization like Scientology, there's always going to be a certain amount of churn, right? There's always going to be young people that come in, spend a year or two in it, and then leave. I mean, that's why you always see these kinds of organizations have heavy recruitment, because they're always going to have people coming and going. What's been different in the last 10 years is how many people who are leaving who are long-time, loyal people who are used to spending huge amounts of money are just walking away. And they're leaving not because they've lost faith in Hubbard, not because they've lost faith in Scientology, but because they're just fed up with what David Miscavige is doing with the fundraising and splitting families apart and just the sort of militant control. And that's what's different. That's what's new. And I don't think there's any question that it's accelerating, and you're seeing a lot more people walk away. Marty Rathbun will tell you that the peak of Scientology occurred around 1991 with probably around 100,000 people worldwide. And it just started to go down after that. And now, like I said, there may be 40,000 left in the world. I think that might be a little optimistic. But no, it's getting harder for them to attract people, and it's getting harder for them to retain people. And, yes, Anonymous has had something to do with that. The press has had something to do with that, but mostly it's internal. Mostly it's, David Miscavige keeps coming up with this ways for people to pay money for things that don't get them up that bridge towards being superhuman. That was the emphasis before. Today the emphasis is just on giving Miscavige money so we can open new buildings, which then are empty.
Right. As I mentioned, I'll be speaking to Karen later. What are the most interesting things someone on the inside can reveal to us? I mean, what kind of things do you think I would be good to start off with asking her?
Well, Karen went through a real traumatic incident, and I think one of the reasons David Miscavige is having trouble today is that there are, in particular, women, mothers in particular, who are fed up with what's happening to their families. Here Karen she was married to the president of the church, and I think she'll tell you that it was Miscavige who went to Heber and forced him to divorce her. And they had a child by then, and the child went into the Sea Org by like 6 years old. So, I mean, I've talked to people that were only 7 or 8 years old who signed that billion-year contract, and Karen's son was one of them. And over time, he was encouraged to keep away from her. So, once she found out that Heber was being treated awfully at the base, and he was basically kept in prison, she started complaining about it publicly, and kind of quietly within the ex-Scientology community. And her son was told to disconnect from her. Her son was told, don't have anything to do with your own mother. And so it was really, really a bad situation. And then he died. And, I got a message when she found out about it. I was one of the first people that she told. And so I got to break that news. It was heartbreaking that this son that Scientology had told to keep away from her then died. He had pneumonia and treated it wrong. He treated pneumonia with a medicine that actually suppresses breathing. I mean, it's terrible. I don't know what doctor he was talking to. But, Karen de la Carriere has a very successful art business, and if someone had just told her that her son wasn't feeling well, she could have gotten the best care possible. But instead, he died living in, as a guest in some Scientologist's home. So these are things I would ask her about. She can tell you about that story. But the other thing about Karen is she's so plugged into the ex-Scientologist movement, and she can really tell you about what other people have gone through as far as what's driving them away and what Miscavige is all about. And she's just an amazing resource for, she has kind of, seen the whole arc of what Scientology's gone through.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you're a pretty good resource yourself, Tony. I mean, do you just focus on Scientology, or do you do research about other stuff these days?
Oh yeah, no, I run a news website. I'm the executive editor of Raw Story and write about a lot of other things. But I just, I fell into a great Scientology story in 1995, and one story led to another, and I've just got great resources. And I just, I think Scientology is going through a really remarkable period that, where things are going to come to a head. Miscavige is trying to get more and more money from fewer and fewer people, and this thing is just going through upheaval. And so I like having a front row seat. I'm just reporting what's happening day in and day out, and I enjoy it.
And if people want to find out more, is it TonyOrtega.org they should go to?
That's it. That's where we cover Scientology every day, and I get great information from people that have just left the church, some people still in the church, and we get really interesting scoops day after day at TonyOrtega.org. So yeah, come on by. And also what's great about the website is a lot of the people that take part in the comments are real experts. I mean, people that were in for 20 years, people that, worked directly with Miscavige. So I might report some small news item, but then in the comments, people just have amazing details to add. And I learn from them, and often I'll get a news story reading my own comments. So it's really a community, and hundreds of people comment every day. So I encourage anybody to come by and join in.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us today. It's been really interesting talking to you, and very, very, very grateful for your input and help before I speak to Karen.
Great, and I think you'll enjoy it. She's a hoot.
Cool, yeah. Thanks so much, Tony. Have a good day.
All right, thank you so much. I got to run.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
So without too much waffling from me, let's go on to the interview with Karen de la Carriere, Scientology whistleblower, dubbed the Queen of Scientology by some. She married Heber Jentzsch in 1978, and they were the golden couple. They lived like kings and queens. In the 80s, Heber was made international president, but it all started to go wrong later on when Karen started to question the leadership. But previously, she rubbed shoulders with all the church's elite, including John Travolta. But when she started to question the leadership, she claimed she was brutally punished for it, as do other people who've left Scientology, other Scientology whistleblowers. She claimed she was made to run for many hours a day for 3 months and was imprisoned in the hole. had to do things like chip paint off a metal pole. She, along with others, claims that in the Sea Org, the management branch, they ban children, so it doesn't really help children's upbringings. And I've seen on other YouTube channels people who've left Scientology saying that they never had much of a relationship with their parents. And in 2010, Karen's own son was kind of almost forced to turn against her because of her questioning the leadership. Anyway, I've started waffling anyway, so let's just get on with the interview and listen to what Karen de la Carriere has to say. So I'm pleased to welcome Karen de la Carriere to the show. She was in Scientology for 35 years, and now she is what could be described as a Scientology whistleblower. Karen, welcome to Truth Sentinel. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Scott. Happy to be here.
Now, I just wanted to start off with talking about Heber Jentzsch. I don't know if I pronounced that wrong. You were married to Heber, and apparently there hasn't been an awful lot of word from Heber. And I just wondered whether you knew what's happened to him. I mean, I've sort of realised that some people sort of disappear in Scientology for a while if they want to be protected from the media. I just wondered if what was the deal with that situation.
Heber is a tragic story, just a tragic, bittersweet story of abuse. He was raised in polygamy, which is sort of frowned on by the Mormon Church. Heber had 57 brothers and sisters. His father had 8 wives. And his father 57. Was a brutal... Pardon?
57, did you say?
57. 57 brothers and sisters from
wow.
8 wives.
That's a huge family.
8 wives. Huge family.
Hmm.
And his father kind of used his brothers and sisters and Heber as a workforce. They had to till the soil and do farming, and his father would actually electric shock with spark plugs and other devices children that didn't work and produce enough toil and labor, in their farm.
Wow, that's so not a completely normal upbringing.
No, and Heber grew up with certain kind of complete a senior male figure lashing out brutality, and the little boy having to swallow it. And after growing up like that, guess what? Heber had another brutal psychopath named David Miscavige, also leashing out horrendous punishment. So he left his polygamous family cult only to join the Scientology cult, and then eventually be the victim of intense brutality. You see the chain of the earlier similar and then the later version of it.
Yes, I heard that David Miscavige wasn't fond of Heber. Do you know what's the reason why for that?
Well, there's numerous. Heber was vastly popular with Scientology audiences. They loved him, and there was a kind of jealousy. Heber was the spokesman of the church, not only the international president, but prior to Mike Rinder being the spokesman, Heber was on every show under the sun, moon, and stars. 60 Minutes, various shows. I can't remember them, just one after another, national programs, CNN, he was a spokesman, and Miscavige punched him, beat him, assaulted him. There's numerous write-ups on this on the internet, but the most famous one was written by Mike Rinder, who replaced Heber. And he detailed the physical abuse that Miscavige did. This is people can't swallow this. How can a religion have physical violence behind the curtains? How does a religious leader be synonymous with the word thug? Or it just doesn't add up. It's beyond. You can't make this stuff up. This is beyond even Hollywood. Can you imagine the Dalai Lama or the Pope in the Vatican pleading beating their head honcho staff. I mean, it defies reality. Anyway, Heber was, one of the punishments Heber endured was being thrown into a lake, a freezing cold lake in November at St. Hill in England, where the Church of Scientology have a big campus. And Heber, at like 65 years old, with 2 or 3 other executives, were hurled in as punishment to the pond, the lake near St. Hill, well, on the grounds of St. Hill. And this was done daily, day after day after day, as a punishment. In all the confusion, Heber fell over some log and twisted and broke his leg or his ankle or some such. And Miscavige relentlessly accused then Heber of being a victim and deliberetly breaking his own leg to get sympathy.
like someone would do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the way. And Heber was in this horrific prison called SP Hole. If anyone just went to Wikipedia and put in Scientology SP Hole, the whole description and picture and everything is on Wikipedia.
And that's kind of like the Scientology prison, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's the prison of prisons. This is where the senior executives go as supreme punishment. In the first few years of SP Hole, they were not even allowed to go home. They had to sleep under their desks on deep in the same place, and were only allowed of this dungeon, this prison, once or twice a week for showers. It was just a place of just unbelievable confinement, and they would scream at each other, and the whole endurance there was for them to give up their so-called crimes. Scott, how could someone already in the church serving a brutal schedule have built up all these? These aren't people who could be bank robbers and go. These people who are already just serving the church. Anyway, that was Heber's life for 7 years. Sorry to give you a long-winded answer, but you asked, what about Heber? Well, that was Heber's life for 7 years. After serving the church 45 years, that's where he ended up. Mm-hmm.
No, thanks for your answer. I wanted to ask you also, as someone who was in Scientology for such a long period of time, what is Scientology, or what was it for you? Is it a cult, a religion, a self-help program, psychiatry, psychotherapy? For you, what would you sort of narrow it down to?
Well, my view of it obviously changed and morphed and became more and more cynical, more and more disaffected as Scientology more or less changed. Initially, it was only a self-help therapy, One person was supposed to sit down, have a person go back into former times, former rough areas of their life, look and examine it, and have some great realization and more perception, more wisdom. So initially, it seemed all the early books, Scott, named it as just more or less a mental science. The first book, Dianetics, Modern Science of Mental Health. Then the next big book, Science of Survival. So it was like a mental therapy, which they heavily used the word science. In fact, the early church was called Church of Religious Science. So the word science was truly bandied around. This business of calling it a church was purely done for tax purposes. Hubbard said that himself. Got to gain tax exemption. Got to get out of paying tax. That was a ploy the church wanted all along its life and time track. For me, it was, I truly believed that it was a new thing that could help others. That's what I believed in early days. It seemed to have some good, good procedures that helped another person.
And do you think it did help in any way? Does it have any benefits for people or society?
I do believe that some procedures did get helpful results. But I'm going to give a caveat here. At what cost? You know that I lost my son in a brutal vengeance retaliation from the church. So when I look at it, I don't care what win I had. It cost me the price of my only child. That's the thing with Scientology. Even if it gives you this, that, and the other, in the formal Church of Scientology, there is a price you pay, and it is blood. If you can visualize a pair of scales in your head, the famous justice scales, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the scale. If I give you a gold nugget, but I want to lop off your leg or lop off your arm so that you're some kind of, not quadriplegic, but so that you're completely, utterly dysfunctional and now you're maimed and paralyzed, would you want that gold? Would you want a nugget of some real value, some real cash in exchange for your arm and leg? Of course not.
Nope.
So the whole thing in Scientology is, regardless of what therapy or procedures they have, the cost is brutal. The cost, the payment, what you pay. And why I say that is, at any time, anything you get in Scientology is only leased. Leased meaning it's rented out to you. And at any moment they can just cut it off. So if they say you have attained this state, that state clear, they can cancel that. So then they take back what they gave you if they declare you a subversive person or excommunicate you. All your certs or whatever you did is canceled. So if they can grant you something and then take it back in a cancellation, you didn't really get that on any permit. You only got it up to the point you toed the line.
Right, yeah.
Therefore, it was only leased to you no matter how many hundreds of that, no matter what money you gave them. It's a temporary thing that they can cancel at any time. You follow?
Yeah, definitely.
And then the cost is brutal. Why do I say it costs so much? Well, if you have a Scientology business and you get out of favor with the church, you're not in good standing. As they declare you, they've got this label, subversive person. Well, all the staff you have working for you will walk out. Your business can get destroyed. Your family, if your family is in the church, they will shun you and cut you off like a leper. So you will lose family, you will lose friends, others. The culture in the church is to shun and disconnect from someone who is no longer in good standing. So the cost in Scientology is complete and utter disconnection from friends, from family, lose your business, lose your connections. This is a heavy price to pay for voicing criticism of the church.
And on the same subject of prices and cost, there's been a lot said about the cost of being a Scientologist. How much money do you think you gave to Scientology over the time you were in Scientology? I mean, do you agree that it's a lot to do with money?
Well, I was mostly staff. For many years, I was staff. But in the last 5 years in Scientology, I gave them $250,000, just in 5 years. I'm glad you asked this question about cost, Scott. This is a pay-as-you-go religion. Every hour you must pay for. And the moment you could be in the middle of the moment you have finished that last hour you paid for, there is money, coercion, and extortion to pay the next chunk. Nothing in Scientology is free. Nothing. Nothing. You pay hour by hour. It is completely, you go to a Catholic priest and you give a confession. There's no money involved. They hope that you give money in the collection box that goes around on a Sunday, or they have collection boxes or whatever. But the Scientology is the complete opposite of that. I had a friend I was having a social dinner with the other night, and he belonged to a Christian type religion, and one of the offshoots of Christianity. And he was saying how when they ask for money, they almost say, now don't pay if if money is tight for you right now, don't feel you're obligated to pay. You only give if you can spare some money. They almost were forbidding you to pay anything to that church. I don't know what it was, like Church of the Nazarene or some offshoot of Christianity. But in Scientology, they lock you up in a room, and it'll be 4 against 1. And they will just demand money from you, money that you don't even have in the bank. They force you to put it on a credit card and then go work hard and pay off your credit card.
So they could help people get into debt then?
Oh, I can't even tell you the people who've lost their homes in foreclosure, having given all their money to the church. Tony Ortega did a brilliant story just about a week ago on a guy called Richie Acunto. Richie for Richard, A-C-U-N-T-O. And you will see, here's a guy who lived in Beverly Hills who had a thriving company, and he gave the church millions. And he's now going around with a mega bowl, penniless, literally penniless. Lost his home in foreclosure. The church got all the money, and the church laughs all the way to the bank. And this is not a rare story. It's a story that happens over and over again. The greed of the Church of Scientology knows no bounds.
And is it true you people have to actually almost pay for their own punishments?
You know, they used to have indulgences in the Middle Ages, right? You could pay the Pope, you could pay you could pay for certain things, and your sins would be forgiven, kind of thing.
Yeah.
In Scientology, you do get brutal punishment. It's a culture of punishment, of cracking the whip. Not so much when you first come in, but as you stay in, you're expected to know and understand. But your original question was, do you pay for your own punishment? Well, the church believes that if you are punished enough and very, very severely, you will come to your senses. It's a very weird kind of thing to believe, because Scientology screams about psychiatry and the evils of psychiatry. And one of their most critical sentences on psychiatry is that psychiatry punishes electric shock. They consider this huge punishment, scrambling the mind and scrambling the brain and giving the person amnesia and so on. But Scientology punishes psychologically. In other words, there is always threat. If you don't knock this off, we'll declare you and take away your kids, and your wife will never speak to you again, and blah, 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 blah. So it is a religion which engages in punishment.
And Tony told me that people can have to work quite hard sometimes and get paid very little. Is that the case? And does Scientology provide work for some people? Can you actually make money from Scientology?
Yes. Well, Tony is absolutely right on, but here's the thing. There's sort of three different categories in Scientology. One is you're just public. That's all. You walk in, you give them money, you pay by the hour, you get counseling, you do the training, whatever. That's just public, right? And then there's staff, and they sign 5-year contracts or 2.5-year contracts, and they're on all these satellite little organizations dotted across, the globe. And these are shrinking. They're getting less and less. And then there's what they call the clergy, the C organization, that wear fake military uniform with lanyards and medals and CO caps, and they all have fake Navy names, lieutenant commander, lieutenant captain. These are all ripped off from the Navy. Now, those are the people who sign 1 billion-year contracts. And these are the people where punishment and brutality you see, you're locked in. You've sold all your furniture. You don't have any. You entered this so-called fraternity, the Sea Org, and you've slowly cut yourself off from the outside world. Sea Org are very cloistered, and that's where the real punishment truly occurs. It's borderline sadism. For various reasons, you can be hurled into a gulag called the RPF, Rehabilitation Project Force. And this is a mind control punishment area of the Church of Scientology. It is shameful. I've been in it, but your listeners can just Google Scientology RPF on YouTube, and person after person after person will give horror stories of what it's like in there. And pay is almost nothing, and you slave, often get sleep deprivation, and you work and slave for the church 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Mm-hmm.
And is it at the Sea Org where they don't really like children to be around?
Wholesale abortions and baby slaughter for 25 years. They've only just recently, in the last 3-4 years, stopped doing it. They only stopped doing it not because they became more benevolent or the church woke up and had an ethics shift or change in morality and ethics. They stopped doing it because of lawsuits and internet outrage. Twitter, message boards, Google, YouTube, just on Facebook, the uproar on the enforced abortions gave it a black eye. So the church stopped enforcing abortions due to bad public relations and bad lawsuits, not because of a change of inner sense of morality, but baby slaughter. And again, they wouldn't pay. They wouldn't pay. They made Planned Parenthood, which is funded by the federal government. Planned Parenthood had to give the free abortions. The church made the taxpayer pay when the federal government funds certain things. Well, who funds the federal government? The taxpayer. You follow?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, so right on abortion. Abortions were just wholesale. I've got videos on this too. I interviewed a guy called Gary Weber who would round up the women once a week, and they would go in vans. 14 women to a van. They were mostly in their early 20s. And they would be farmed out to various abortion clinics. And the church ordered it and enforced it because when young women had babies, they would want to go off and be moms and produce less for the greedy, avarice church. So babies were frowned on because they were considered a nuisance.
And I saw an interview with David Miscavige, and he said that none of the money goes to him or to Scientology. It all goes back into the community. Is that true, would you say?
Oh, Scott. David Miscavige lives like a rock star. His food budget is something like $2,000 a week. He is waited on hand and foot. He has an entourage. He has his own personal masseurs, his own personal fleet of secretaries, his own computer guy, his own makeup, his own hairdresser, his own makeup artist, his own chauffeur, his own cleaners, his own valet, his own chefs. So he lives, and I don't know if you've seen pictures of his office. Everything is marble and granite and just the ultimate luxury life. He truly, he has a fleet of cars. In that new building called the Superpower Building in Clearwater, there's a whole floor, one whole floor, which is the size of a city block. And that's just David Miscavige living quarters, where he has his own theater to entertain his buddies like Tom Cruise, John Travolta. He has his own, in Hollywood, a $4 million building was bought just to be his Hollywood hideaway. It's at the back of a structure called Alter Services. Oh, no, no. David Miscavige doesn't live like any Sea Org member. He lives like royalty. Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, apart from the interview I saw on YouTube, there's not an awful lot of stuff around with David Miscavige these days. Does he not do any interviews anymore? Or does he tend to hide away?
Good question. He cannot answer hard questions. He's hiding. When has David Miscavige given a media interview? I mean, he's hiding, right? One of the first questions that would be asked him is, there's all these allegations that you beat, punch, and body slam people. Well, did you? Now, Scott, there have been 4 books that have come out. 4 books. Blown for Good, Counterfeit Dreams, Abuse at the Top. Then there's Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman, and the best-selling book of all, one of the best books to read, is the Larry Wright book called Scientology, The Prison of Belief. And none of these books got a lawsuit for libel. None of these books got a restraining order to stop the publisher or stop the distribution at Barnes & Noble. None of them did. And they all cover extensive beatings by David Miscavige. What does that tell you? Wouldn't you sue if you were the head of a religion and the book is detailing all these people coming forward who were beaten and punched with violence by Miscavige? Not a single lawsuit. The sound of silence.
At the same time, wouldn't people, isn't it possible to sue him for doing that, or to bring charges against him for the abuse?
You know, there's something called decompression, and there's something called a statute of limitations. It takes about 3 to 4 years for someone to, you really come out of it all messed up in the head. You really do. You're sort of feeling like a subatomic particle. You're crushed into being an amoeba, a little cell. You feel small. You don't have chutzpah. You don't have, you know, a feeling of, I'm gonna fight back. You don't feel that. You're crushed. When you live in a mind control environment for years, you come out pretty fragile, Scott. You're not up to it. And by the time you go through this, what we call decompression. And by the time you're ready to speak up, 4 or 5 years later, and you go to the FBI, they say, well, why are you reporting now? Why? You waited 5 years to now come to us to say that you were beaten? Why didn't you? And then, by then the statute of limitation. Right now, when people leave, they're given a fat paycheck to not reveal the beatings and stuff. There's like contracts signed. Debbie Cook, are you familiar with the famous Debbie Cook letter that caused an earthquake? Debbie Cook signed one of these that she wouldn't reveal all this. And yet she then talked about it. And the church went ballistic and sued her. So guess what? She stood in court, and she put it all on court record. You're allowed to answer no matter what you've signed in a private contract. If you're subpoenaed in a court of law, and you're asked questions in a court of law, you can whistleblow all you want, because you're answering specific questions, right? No, these people, some people have reported, but they were out of, I think assault and battery has a really limited time frame. I think you have to come forward within 2 to 4 years or whatever. Anyway, to answer your question, when you're in the church, you would never even think of reporting. It's considered a suppressive act to report church misconduct to law enforcement. That's Hubbard. You cannot report anything that happens within the church to any entity outside the church. That's considered, you would immediately get declared a suppressive person for doing that. And remember, in the tunnel, you're believing that your spiritual eternity would be taken away forever. You're believing all this. You're swallowing all this. So nobody that gets beaten within the church, first of all, would even dream. First of all, there's no access. You know, there's no phone booths to call 911. Very, very few people are allowed cell phones. Only very trusted David Miscavige entourage and a few key salespeople have cell phones. You can't reach the outside world. There is no access to the outside world. And then doubling that, you believe you're mentally handcuffed because you believe in it all. Mm-hmm.
And talking can get you in trouble, and you can get declared as suppressive. Did that happen to you? I mean, you mentioned about your son, and if it's okay for you to talk about that.
Sure.
Would you be able to go into what happened there? Because it sounds pretty terrible what happened there.
My beautiful boy, my one and only child, died at 27 years old, and the Church of Scientology has blood on its hands on his death. I was speaking out with Heber's incarceration. Heber was only allowed to see Alexander 11 times in 15 years. 15 years of my son's life. He saw his father 11 times, and usually for just a couple of hours or half a day. Heber was mostly imprisoned by then and had no freedom to see his son.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, it really was. They rarely saw each other. Alexander had a big button on that. He would call himself the boy without a dad. He really had a lot of emotional pain on that. He didn't know all the horror stories. He started getting wise towards the end, but to him, Heber didn't have time for him. He didn't realize the structure didn't allow it. He felt slighted by his father more than realizing that his father couldn't see him because his father was trapped and jailed and imprisoned and all of that. What was it you wanted to ask me about?
Just to go into what happened with your son and a bit about, it seems to be a common thing that parents don't get to spend a lot of time with their children. And in your case of your son, wasn't he told to sort of not talk to you too much after you were sort of regarded as trouble, you know?
Yes. I was posting on Marty's blog. I was clearly a whistleblower. And he called me up and said, "Mom, you can't write to me. You must never text me. You must never phone me. Till you get yourself squared away with Office of Special Affairs." That's the division of the church that does the spying, the intelligence, the legal, the public relations. It's the black bag operation, covert CIA sort of thing of the church. It's called Office of Special Affairs. It used to be called the Guardian's Office back in the day. Then when they all got busted by the federal government, the Guardian's Office, 12 of them went to federal prison, and there's a huge scandal in 1977-78. And after that, they reincarnated and called themselves Office of Special Affairs. So Alexander's telling me, till the church approve of me, until I get myself righted with the church, he can't talk to me, and I must never talk to him. 2 years later, he was dead. He was dead of methadone, which is a heroin derivative, and a cocktail of 8 other drugs. But all he had was pneumonia. He had chest pains, but he believed that, by the way, these drugs were given by prescription. He wasn't doing it on the street. These were prescriptive drugs. He never, ever had a full medical diagnosis. He complained of pain, but he never had a medical diagnosis. And, I'm pretty affluent. I could have had him, if he was allowed to talk to me, he had these high fevers, I would have had him had a full medical done. But instead, he was taking drugs to ease his pain. And the reason that I know the church is completely to blame here is they cut him off. He was not allowed. He even protested. He told friends of his, "I don't agree that I can't talk to my mom. I don't agree with this." And the church handler, intelligence person who works in the black covert intelligence operation, she's called Donatella Kavanagh. she would tell him, well, you know, your mother doesn't really care because she could get back in good graces of the church. She just has to do the formula A to E. A to E is an arduous 2-year, 3-year thing where you have to make reparations to the church and admit that everything you've done was evil and that the church are all good guys. And it's a long, convoluted program, ridiculous. You know, once you've come out and seen the light, you're not going to go back and do A to E, the formula called A to E. Anyway, Alexander was with his in-laws, and he had no job at the time. He took these drugs, and he lay there for about a day before they discovered the dead body. And even when he wasn't moving, the in-law took his 5-year-old to school and then came back and called 911. But I was somewhat bitter about it because when the church, even though I slaved for them and worked for them and contributed for 35 years, they wouldn't let me see the dead body at the funeral home. They're not allowed to see the dead body when it's in the coroner's office because, you know, you can't interfere with the autopsies and stuff. But once it went to the funeral, I went to the funeral home. You know how I discovered my son was dead? A stranger on Facebook PM'd me. The church did not have the benevolence to even pick up the phone and tell me my son was dead. I only found out by accident on a Facebook private message. And, we went to the coroner's office many times. When we showed up at the funeral home, the funeral director had been completely sealed off by Office of Special Affairs to not let me see the dead body before cremation. And I raised a lot of noise about this. Scott, this story went viral. It was on the Daily Mail for 4 days. It was a front page of Huffington Post, front page of America Online, and it went to Australia, New Zealand. It went the story that a sadistic church whose staff member who worked for 35 years was not allowed to see the dead body of her son before cremation. In that one sentence, it really tells you of the culture and vindictive maliciousness of the Church of Scientology. I mean, what would it cost them if I saw my son and gave him a last kiss on his forehead before they cremated the dead body? What cost would it have been to the church? I mean, tell me, answer my question, Scott. What cost would it be to the church for me to have granted me that?
Well, it wouldn't have cost them anything much to make a phone call, would it?
Would it not have cost them a damn thing? This was complete maliciousness. It was vindictiveness. But you know what, Scott? It made me strong. It made me, instead of curling up like a ball in a fetal position and crying, don't think I didn't go through my grief. Don't think I didn't go through my agony and anguish. But I came out like a superbug. What does that mean, superbug? I'm stronger. I've had all the antibiotics have been tried on. What more can you do than take away a 27-year-old from the mom? And this is a church I served. This is a church I slaved for $12 a week for years of my life. No day off, no annual leave. I worked hard for them, Scott. I slaved for the entity that became a Frankenstein monster that then deprived me of even the last 2 years of life of my son, the life of my son, and then to punish me, not let me see him before cremation. Can you believe that?
No. And do you think you could have...
I mean, it just showed you the maliciousness.
Do you think you could have stopped the tragedy in any way if you had been in contact with your son before, in that previous 2 years?
Scott, 90% of people, 95% of people with pneumonia, walking pneumonia, cure with the right antibiotic. At autopsy, he had not taken any antibiotics to handle the pneumonia. He just kept taking more and more painkillers. You know?
Well, certainly at that age he should be able to recover. I mean, I've had pneumonia myself, and actually a more serious one, not the walk-in one, a more serious one, and
Yeah.
and I recovered. So because I you know, when young people tend to recover from pneumonia, if in the older years, then it can
Yeah.
kill. But you know, yeah, I mean at his age he probably should have recovered from that.
Well, if you're drugging yourself with a cocktail of 8 other drugs, not eating, you know, taking all these painkillers, no antibiotics. I think this manipulation of turning him against me, cutting me off as a life. So he really was orphaned, had no dad. His dad is in prison at the SB Hole in base. And his mom was cut off because the church ordered it. You see, he had already married a Scientology girl whose whole family were buried in Scientology, and he would lose his wife, and he would lose everything he had if he talked to me. That's the emotional blackmail that the church runs on its thing. You toe the line, you do what we say, or else. You follow?
Yeah, and is it that incident with your son alone that inspired you to leave Scientology, or was it more than that?
No, I had already left. Remember, they cut him off from me because I was already speaking out on the darker side of Scientology. I was speaking out. I was speaking out because Heber was incarcerated for all these years, and I was already a voice. So then they kicked in the revenge of doing their number regarding Alexander being taken away from me. I was already... More and more of my friends had already crossed over and left. And there was the most astounding thing that came out on the web called the Truth Rundown. It's a sort of a sarcastic, the church has these rundowns, you know, the money rundown, the PTS rundown, So in tongue-in-the-cheek, it used to be called the St. Pete Times, it's now called Tampa Bay Times, did this whole thing, which is so findable on Google, the Truth Rundown. And it's stunning to read. I mean, there's 12 people right there talking about the incredible abuse, the beatings, the body sweat, you know. It's all on video as well. So the Truth Rundown came out, and that influenced me. And then shortly after, Anderson Cooper of CNN did a show called Scientology, A History of Violence. I mirrored and copied all this on my YouTube channel. Once you've read the Truth Rundown and you've seen Scientology, A History of Violence, you really, truly are enlightened that there is something here. There is much more to it than meets the eye on Scientology.
And you saw the Truth Rundown, and that sort of helped influence you. Do you feel that some of the things that you're saying and that other whistleblowers are saying will inspire other people to leave, or do people not have internet access inside Scientology?
Well, the ones inside are strictly forbidden to read the internet. There's huge punishments for reading the internet. They're not allowed to. But one of the people in the Truth Rundown was someone I greatly admired and still admire, called Marty Rathworth. And I knew Marty for like 30, 35 years. I knew Marty. I did, I went on mission. I mean, I knew Marty. And Marty was speaking out. And that was a huge, big influence on me. And then Mike Bringer, who was the person who was the international spokesman, he'd already fled as well. And I started communicating with these people who'd already left. And that was the end. You know, I knew I was risking, I was really putting putting my relationship at risk, but I had to follow my conscience, and I had to speak up because it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm.
And are you ever afraid of what Scientologists could do and how they might react to what you're doing and saying? Can there be problems when someone leaves Scientology?
You know, within 2 weeks of me coming out, Scientology Inc. called the FBI in an anonymous phone call and claimed I was trafficking children in underage sex. Now, why do I say the Church of Scientology did that? I say it because I don't have any enemies, and nobody would dream up such a ludicrous, absolute, off-the-wall, off-the-charts accusation. This has the fingerprint and odor of Office of Special Affairs, their covert branch. So it was warfare from day one. They were sending me a message. You know what? We'll set you up. We'll ambush you and get you, you know. But you know what happened? As soon as the FBI did a tiny little initial investigation, as soon as they found out that I had left the Church of Scientology and they dropped this wild accusation. The whole thing was ended and the case was closed before it even, within 2 hours. The church is infamous for making anonymous phone calls on its enemies to try and spread dirt and smear. And sometimes, you know, Scott, I am such a voice. I've had 3.5 million views on my YouTube channel, which has only been in existence a year and a half, and I have 3.5 million views and about 12,000 subscribers. This is pretty, you know, I'm a voice. And now and again, there's just yet another explosion of church shenanigans. And I was saying the other day, I think I said it on video, I almost feel sorry for them at times because it's a tsunami which can't be stopped. The internet is here to stay. There's no unringing the bell. You don't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The word is out on Scientology's dark side.
Yeah. There seems to be a lot of people coming out and talking about Scientology, and with all the problems and the people leaving and the abuse, why do you think people such as Tom Cruise, John Travolta, Kirstie Alley, they still promote Scientology? Do they not know anything that's going on?
Scott, there's different versions or editions of Scientology, right? You can buy a smelly Harry Potter book for $1 on, you know, used book with Rumpled, or you can buy a leather-bound edition signed by J.K. Rowling's, #1 of 30 in the world in some incredible leather of royal ostrich, blah, 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 right? It's the same book. The content is the same inside. But you can buy a different edition of it, right? You can buy a cheap paperback with the cover missing, or you can buy the supreme first edition. Scientology is like that to celebrities. They get the royal treatment. They get the red carpet rolled out for them. They don't ever see anything like SP Hole and RPF and all these punishments. They are catered to. They are pampered. Their feathers are stroked. Tom Cruise outrageously had Sea Org members pimp for him. They worked on his real estate. They polished his motors. For $50 a week, he had slave labor raising the value of his real estate. And then, when he wanted a girlfriend, did you ever, I don't think you read the book Blown for Good, huh?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Blown for Good is by an insider called Mark Headley, who worked at the INT base, the headquarters, where the hierarchy of Scientology live. And when Tom Cruise needed a girlfriend after Nicole Kidman and him parted, Scientology did a casting call and got all the young beauties that were in Scientology to do videos for Tom Cruise's pleasure to see who he would like to date. So they were given this cock and bull story that they were doing videos to be in a new Mission Impossible, a new movie of Tom. So they all videoed, and they were asked different personal questions, you know. How dedicated a Scientologist are you? How healthy are you? Do you like this? Do you like that? They were all on video. And then the church that has a tax exemption, a 501c, to be this is religious exemption. They religiously and ecclesiastically went through all these videos and took the top 5 most beautiful, most answering all the questions correctly. And Tom Cruise then chose from these videos who he wanted for his next sexual partner.
Wow.
This is the kind of favor. Now, it's all in the book called Blown for Good, but Vanity Fair got hold of the story. Brave journalist called Maureen Orse. And Vanity Fair told the story I'm telling you here, from head to toe, explicitly. And they put pictures of this beautiful knockout model that Tom chose. And they had a three-month torrid affair, and then it all fell apart. And the whole thing is in the Vanity Fair essay. But the reason I bring it in on the parameter, not to gossip about what happened or didn't happen with Tom Cruise. And I'm saying the church actually rounded up pretty girls. That's nothing. For Tom Cruise to choose a sexual partner? I mean, do you see how far this is off the rails for a tax-exempt religious? Do you see how a celebrity is pampered for? What church can you go to that'll have your parish priest round up videos of pretty girls so you can choose which one you want to hump next?
I think a lot of guys might actually quite like that, you know.
But I'm telling you, the favors given to celebs is a completely different. They live in a Never-Never-Land. They live in a Disneyland version of Scientology. It is not the normal Scientology handed out. So you ask, why do they stay? They're protected. They're shielded. They're looked after. Travolta does something outrageous with another male. The whole thing is protected and covered up and shielded when there's bad public relations. They get the VIP treatment.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Kirstie Alley, I saw Kirstie Alley saying that Scientology has millions of followers, and I've heard other people say that. Does anyone know how many followers of Scientology there really are? Because it seems to be confusing.
No, your question is so timely because Mike Rinder, anyone can Google Mike Rinder's blog. They did a chart 24 hours ago of the actuality compared to the propagation of these lies spouted out about millions and all. There's about 40,000 Scientologists worldwide. That's it. And the breakdown and the statistic has all been put on charts with corroborating evidence. Now, is it very noisy? Is it loud? Is there always some catastrophe, calamity, some new person out, some new horror story? Yes, it's noisy. It is noisy. But it's the Al Capone of religion. It's the most brutal, cultish, thuggish, mafia-like quality, so it does make the news. But just because it's noisy doesn't mean it has all these members. Scott, there are more people out here like me who've left the church than have been left behind in the church.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, you're the only person I've ever spoken to about Scientology. I'm not even sure I've met any other Scientologists.
Well, if you go to message boards like Operation Clambake or ex-Scientology message board, there are hundreds of members, just hundreds. Mm-hmm. The reason people leave is, I think, Scott, everybody has a threshold. You can only take that much. And then you hit that threshold, and enough is enough, and you walk. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can keep going, be brutal, be sadistic, do atrocities, and then one day it breaks, the dam breaks, and the person just leaves. You see?
Yeah. And do you feel like you missed out on life because of Scientology? I mean, has it adversely affected your life, or did you have some good times? How do you feel about your experience?
the past is a past, and there's no undoing it. I'm a very much, I have to create the here and now in my own future. I am not going to weep over spilt milk, so to speak, right? Mm. It happened. I've always considered, I do still believe in past lives, like Scientology believes in reincarnation. I believe that this life was a learning lesson for me to get my act together. The whole of my lifetime is a sort of internship where I really learn the facts of life. And I learn how easy it is to get lured in and sucked in and believe in it all and stop thinking within the tunnel and not seeing the bigger picture. The lessons I've learned have been just powerful and incredible. So in that sense, I've become bigger, stronger, more wiser, more perceptive, more sensitive, more enlightened by the experience than if I just lived on some farm and, lived just a life in a comfort zone. I lived it all, and I'm not going to regret the past. It's what I make of the future of my remaining years on Earth, and I have become a superbug. What does that mean, superbug? I'm inoculated against most anything, and not going to go down.
And well, I hope you do have a great future. What are your plans? I mean, you now deal in art. Is that going well? And what other plans do you have?
I have a very, very good. I've had ups and downs because of the economy in the Thomas Kincaid art business, but I'm very grounded and plugged in, and have an extraordinary mailing list of regular repeat customers. I'm very, very happy in my art business. The very, very good. It's a good. It's taken me years and years to build up a juggernaut in art, and I have a strong presence on eBay and Amazon. And so I'm sorry, I'm not really answering your question. I'm talking about my art business.
No, that's fine. If people want to have a look at your art, and also if they want to find out more about your YouTube channel and things like that with Scientology, can you just tell us where they can find out about your art and about Scientology?
Well, on eBay, if you put in, well, the name of my store is Karen's Kincaid Art Store. That's it, Karen's Kincaid Art Store. Mm-hmm. But because I have such a strong presence on eBay, and because I have the top seller badge, I come up on the front page almost inevitably, no matter what you do. If you put in, let's say you put in Thomas Kincaid Snow White. Oh, that's a good thing. Put in Thomas Kincaid Snow White, and I'll dominate the page. I'm about the only dealer left on planet Earth that still has a supply of a Disney painting called Snow White. So anyway, anyone can find me there, and I offer 400 to 500 images on eBay at any 365 days a year, just never ending. And what was the other question? Where did they find me regarding
about Scientology? You know, about you've made videos on YouTube as well, yeah?
Yes. The YouTube channel is called Surviving Scientology. So any Google search, you don't even have to be in YouTube. Just put in Surviving Scientology, Karen, Karen, and boom, it'll go straight to my YouTube channel. Thank you that's very generous of you. Thank you there's so much to learn about it all. I think I help a lot of moms and dads who still have a child in the cult. The videos are truly an education, and I have lots of guests. It's okay if you ever watch my channel and you want a guest that I've interviewed and you would like them further because you want to do a series on Scientology. I already have in my head a couple of people that I already know would love to interview with you and tell you their story.
That'd be great, yeah.
Come back to me if you want some real hot stories of people who lived it, breathed it, and had dramatic escape. Some of these escapes are like an Alfred Hitchcock thriller. They're planned and planned like a military SEAL Team 6 operation to get through those gates, to get through the guards. It was just like, to escape, and they're thrillers. And I got a couple of people that love to tell you their stories. Yeah, you can always email me and PM me on Facebook.
Yeah, no, thanks, Karen, and thanks for telling us your story. I mean, your story reads like a novel as well, and thanks very much for sharing your story and your perspectives on Scientology. And people can listen, make up their own minds about Scientology, and I'm sure you are helping a lot of people do that. And thanks for coming and talking to me and to people on this show today.
I agree, Scott. I agree. Well, thank you. But I agree, like, people should be able to look at both sides and evaluate. And normally when I interview, media often asks the church, well, would you like to give a rebuttal? Would you like to come on with Karen? And they won't, and they don't deny my stories, and they don't deny, they hide like the proverbial ostrich under the thing. Or they give something completely outlandish. So you're right, people should make up their own mind. And people should be allowed to study both sides of the equation. But in Scientology, you are not allowed to go to any site adverse. You're not allowed. You're punished if you do. But anyway, I had fun talking to you. Thank you. You're a world traveler, and you're off to Israel and Egypt now. Have good travels, and I enjoyed hanging with you for the last hour. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed chatting with you as well, Karen.
All right, that was fun, Scott.
Yeah, no, take it easy. Have a great day.
Okay, take care, Scott. Bye.
Thanks.
So what's your views on Scientology? Drop us a line, leave us a voicemail, go to the chat room, leave some comments under the video. If you're a Scientologist and you want to come and talk to us, let us know. We're quite happy to hear your side of the debate, and that also applies to David Miscavige, Tom Cruise, John Travolta. You're welcome to come on as well. Remember, blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. If you can donate, it's very gratefully received. We need to update equipment, and basically, if there's someone out there, say a multi-millionaire that's got a bit of money they could throw away, then please just donate it on the donations button on YouTube in the About section. We'd be very, very grateful, and it would give us the chance to upgrade this show to something better. But I don't want it to be too slick. I think that's partly the problem with mainstream media. It's too slick. No mistakes are allowed. I mean, part of telling the truth is being real, being truthful, warts and all, Another way you can help is buy a Truth Sentinel t-shirt. They're about $20 plus postage and packing, different postage and packing depending on where you are in the world. So just contact us on email, scottsentinel9@gmail.com, and tell us your size, address, then make a donation, and then we can send you the t-shirt. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook. Just search for Scott Sentinel or Truth Sentinel with Scott. We've got 2 YouTube channels, remember, Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 2. I'm actually going to upload this episode onto Truth Sentinel 2 as an experiment because it's got more subscribers. It's all a long story, but never mind. As well as Truth Sentinel t-shirts, we've teamed up with a company who produce their own political t-shirts. So if you'd rather choose something different, they also donate some money to us if you buy a t-shirt off them. You need to use the Truth1 code to get your 10% discount. Also, there'll be a little bit of a video of me at the end saying a few things, but first a quick quiz for regular listeners. Here's a quiz. Name the 2 guests that have famous fathers. Which guest made it into the Guardian newspaper's top 100 most influential women? Complete the quotation. The greatest enemy of truth is... Who does ex-MI5 agent David Shayler claim to be? How did one Coast to Coast guest inadvertently get involved with the suicides of members of the Heaven's Gate cult? Which city did Mothman appear in? Who or what is Diego Garcia? What film did Stephen Shellen appear in alongside Brad Pitt? Where is our guest John Carriere, taxi driver? What's the name of the potentially dangerous nuclear reactor in Armenia? Okay, if you've been a regular listener, then you should be able to answer most of those questions. If I remember, I'll give the answers in the next show. If I forget, please leave me a voicemail and remind me. Topics coming up in future episodes could include missing persons, time travel, the Dyatlov Pass incident, parallel universes, the control of scientific fact, utopia, Noah's Ark and the flood, revolution, the Egyptian pyramids, biblical prophecies, Truth Alliance discussions, all kinds of things basically. So I think basically we'll go to the video of me just finishing the episode, and occasionally I will put some videos of locations where I'm traveling to. They'll be a bit grainy because I've got a phone basically that hasn't got the highest pixelation of videos. It's another long story. I lost a brand new phone in Ukraine. A lost stroke stolen actually by a taxi driver. Anyway, catch you later. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to give us some feedback if you can. You can also invest in a Truth Sentinel t-shirt, of course. And I just wanted to say please keep supporting us, and thanks to everyone who is contributing. Today I'd like to say a quick thank you to Mateus Jaguar for the new Truth Sentinel music. So thanks. Take it easy. Catch you later. Goodbye.